Morning, everybody, and thank you for coming back. It's nice to see you. I wanted to talk to you this morning about toddler behavior and some of the things that you might be expecting, you might have experienced in other contexts before, and whether you've thought about what it's like on the ground to deal with that behavior in real life. I come from a childcare background. I've worked extensively in many settings over the years, from schools across the year groups to nurseries. I've nannied, I've worked in behaviour schools, I've worked with special educational needs. And one of the behaviours that took me quite by surprise, for a variety of reasons that I'll go into, was dropping. So I have a toddler who drops. If he doesn't want to do something, if he gets overwhelmed or frustrated, he will just stop what he's doing. There's no discussion, there's no processing it. He will just drop full weight to the ground, whether you're holding his hand, whether you're trying to lead him somewhere. And outside of special educational needs, it's not a behaviour that I particularly come across before. And my daughter, my eldest, had never ever done anything like that. We'd maybe had little inklings of tantrums, or she will verbally shut down until you've kind of communicated with her and talked her through it. By the time my second baby was up and running about in toddler form and able to exhibit this kind of behavior, my elder child was definitely knocking on 3. So it had 3 solid years of having babies coming up and not having to cope or manage or anticipate that this would be a thing. Everybody says every baby is different, and you just have to take it in your stride, but it doesn't help you to predict the behaviours that might be. And certainly if you have a young child already, or you've been through the mill, you kind of have a spectrum of behaviours that you're prepared for. You've got tools in your bag, you know what to deal with. So when my little man one day in the supermarket was wanting to stop and do his own thing and just dropped to the floor, I was pregnant and he was a toddler, so just starting to tootle about, and so I was quite heavily pregnant at this point, and I also had my thereabouts 3-year-old to contend with as well. So here we were, big pregnant me, nearly 3-year-old that never really said boo to a goose in terms of confrontational behaviour or obstructive behaviour, not in a negative fashion, but just in terms of labelling it for what it is. And he just plunks himself down. And at the time, I had reread how to talk so that little people will listen. And I had my 3-year-old in the trolley and plunked myself down on the floor with him until he seemed like he was aware of his surroundings enough to be able to talk him through what was going to happen next. What had set it off was because he wanted the sweeties off the shelves. And supermarkets are wonderful for putting all the things that little people will want in their aisle line as you go around. And unfortunately, on this particular day, I'd walked through the aisle that had all of the things that little people want. I was able to just sit there. It was getting on for nap time, so my 3-year-old was starting to get very restless and irritable and starting to make noises to that effect, which obviously in a public setting is not ideal. And you have that fine juggling act between how long do you sit on the floor and coax this person out of whatever it is that they're going through in this very soft and gentle way versus scooping them up, which will either allow you to move out of the way and hope that they'll forget, or will exacerbate the feelings and create a more argumentative situation, certainly a more volatile emotional situation for them, because they're being dragged before they're ready into a situation that they don't want to be in, which then obviously increases your stress load because you're trying to manage and mediate all of these different things that are going on for the very first time in a very public setting, which is not exactly the situation that anybody really wants to be in, but most parents to some degree are prepared that it will happen. Whether you're prepared in that specific moment is another kettle of fish altogether. So I wasn't prepared, but fortunately, because of what I was reading at the time, I was really trying to focus on strengthening those communication skills and giving them the time and space to be able to work through it. And I had no inhibitions really about sitting on the floor with my toddler in that context. What I was thinking of was more, how long have I got on the clock before this becomes really disruptive for my 3-year-old? You got that ticking clock definitely buzzing away in your head, and trying to quickly and efficiently provide the needs for the most needy child in that situation. Fortunately, in that situation, given the time and the patience and the effort, and a relatively quiet supermarket at that time of day, I was able to scoop him up and move on of his own free will, and we didn't have any more incidents that day. However, it set a trend now that he is very much through and through a dropper. So he's unhappy, he drops. If he doesn't want to do something, he drops. If he can't find the words, he drops. If he's tired, he drops. And there's very little negotiating, and there's very little that immediate communication can do. Not because he can't understand it or because he can't express it. He's a very, very talkative child, and it's quite often something that strangers will pass comment on and ask how old he is, because his expressive ability is beyond what you would maybe expect of the ordinary 2-year-old, and I credit that to him having an older sister very close in age, and we're a very talkative family in general, so all the credit to him. It's not, in my opinion, at the moment, any of those things. It's this sheer overwhelmed sensation that seems to go through him, and he just needs a minute to reset himself. And the closest that I can compare it to is when he's overtired. So if he misses a nap, he's delayed a nap, the nap just definitely isn't going to happen. He goes into this weird zombie crazy psycho mode, and he just kind of glazes over. There's no more normal child behind the eyes. He just becomes this nutter. But it's that kind of flipping of the switch where I see the similarity, where he's fully cognizant and processing and taking things into, where he just shuts down and he kind of goes on autopilot that little bit more. I'm sure I'll figure it out and find other ways to frame it as he gets bigger and I get more familiar with it. More recently, it's become a difficulty when he gets tired, and the reasons for that are twofold. Because he's 2.5 now, and he has just been weighed in at 16 kilos, so he's way up in the mid 90th centile somewhere, so probably 93, I think. So he's a really chunky little dude, and generally I'm carrying our nearly 1-year-old on my front sling, and so that's like 7-8 kilos worth of baby. And then if he drops and we're out in a public setting and potentially far away, I then have to be able to carry another 16 kilos of child. So we're talking the best part of 25 kilos any kind of distance. So the reason for mentioning this, apart from discussing the behavior aspect of it and that anticipation that this could happen, is firstly, am I dressed appropriately to be able to carry 25 kilos of child any kind of distance? And that ranges from footwear to whether I've got a jumper on. Am I going to get hot and sweaty, which will obviously reduce my capacity for going any kind of distance? And have I got something that if I bend over or I lean is going to expose me in some way? Or have I got a skirt on where if I'm constantly hitching up children up the side of me, it's going to pull up my clothes in a very undignified fashion? All of which have happened, which is why I have the experience to be able to relay this now today. So, clothing aside, none of my children have really learned that when they're carried, they need to hold their legs up. I'm not quite sure why. They're prompted to it. We've discussed it. We've practiced it, but they will not hold their legs up in kind of monkey fashion very well for very long, which obviously adds to the weight and makes it a harder weight to carry and to distribute as well. So there we go, for a number of reasons. Point number one, if he's going to drop because he's tired, how far away are you? And what can you do to anticipate it? Some people will use double buggies. I now carry a back sling so that if I need to, I used to just leave it in the boot if I knew that I was going for a walk or something like that. But now I carry it with me wherever I go, including in supermarkets, so I can scoop him up, put him on my back, and he's there and secure and he's not going anywhere. He might kick me a little bit. He might get frustrated. He might start flopping about and leaning back and making it awkward for me to maneuver about. But generally, he's restrained. And in terms of sitting side by side in a trolley in a supermarket, for example, you then, if you've got a child that's not particularly happy or has dropped to the floor and you're trying to manage an emotion, putting them in next to another child that might set him off, or he might start not being particularly kind to because there's very little emotional regulation going on there. Yeah, these are the things that I now need to think about, and you might need to anticipate how would it work for you if that was your reality. Now, with 3 children, it's harder. It's much more noticeable than it was when it first started happening. And part of that is the frequency. It happens more often now, and part of that is because he's definitely becoming his own little person, and he's deciding the whys and wherefores and whens of how life will occur and how he wants to communicate and when he wants to communicate. The other component is that I now have this younger baby, and the general rule of thumb when you have lots of little people is that you essentially put the child with the greatest need first. So typically that would always be the youngest child that's less equipped to be able to fend for themselves. However, if you've got a hungry young baby, for example, but you've got a toddler that's on reins or doing something difficult or about to drop in a supermarket whose needs are then more important, a screaming baby? No, because that's hunger and it can be mediated. What you've got to cope with is getting the child that's off on his feet or doing the dangerous thing or falling into a predicament of danger. And that is the most immediate response. But you've got to do it potentially while you've got the screaming baby, which makes it much more stressful. A lot of like fight or flight type reflexes are triggered in that situation. So being able to keep your cool, continue to be able to think clearly despite potentially very loud, piercing, sometimes triggering noises that are going on. And in my case, you've got the elder child as well, who might be distressed by this situation. Usually, if another child is getting more attention, whether it be good or bad, all of the children want in on the game, and the 3-year-old has the capacity then to not just sit and wait patiently or walk side by side and wait patiently. They're going to start getting upset and getting involved in the situation and dealing with their own emotions and whatever. So you're on the clock for the feeding, you're on the clock for the making sure that the child that isn't erupting doesn't erupt and also stays safe. And you're on the clock to be able to manage the dangerous or distressing situation that might be going on with the one that started the upheaval in the first place. So there's a lot of competing needs then, and a lot of pressure to be able to meet all of those competing needs simultaneously. Not possible. You can't meet them simultaneously. It's not going to happen. What you have to do is be able to prioritize and to shift that prioritization as it goes. So on the assumption that you get the toddler under control, and I don't say that in a authoritarian way. What I mean is the situation that's emerging is controllable again and safe. Then who is the competing need? The 3-year-old that's starting to really attention seek and is probably a bit bored and frustrated by the situation, or the baby? The baby is now the situation. If you're in a public setting, it's maybe not your bag to quell the food needs of the baby. So for me, I'm still breastfeeding her, and my automatic reflex would be to pull out a boob. And I have no qualms. I would sit on the floor of a supermarket and do that if that's what she needed in that moment. However, it's probably a lot easier to pull out something for it to hold, to chew, to be able to meet that need until we're in a more controlled, calmer setting. And that's partly to be able to meet the needs of the other children as well. Because if they're already starting to flag, the chances are if I sit down on the floor and feed the baby, that they're going to go off in opposite directions. If I put them in a trolley together, they're going to fight. If I put the toddler in the sling, he's going to kick me while I'm feeding the baby. It's always going to start pulling off things from the shelves behind me. It's not going to be ideal. So distracting, opening a bag of crisps in the supermarket and giving one to the baby. They might be organic, they might be gluten-free, they might be dairy-free. The point is, what is the tool that works in the moment to be able to manage that situation for you? It's identifying the scale and scope of things that could go wrong, and adjusting accordingly. Whatever the 3-year-old is getting distressed about, you have to remember they're probably easier able to be talked through it. So distraction conversation is probably helpful, and talking through what we're going to do next, or what it is that they are looking for. Can you meet that need verbally? And if not, finding the safest, quickest way to be able to manage the noise level to do either to finish up the situation that you're in with calm restored, or to find the quickest, safest way out of the situation altogether. Usually where feeding's involved, the quickest way out of the situation is probably the best one, unless you can sustain a put off. If it's just a comfort thing, or if it's coming up on feeding time because you've been delayed, or so on and so forth. So because dropping, it has been a relatively new experience for me over the last year, and because it has changed since the new baby arrived in terms of the number of people that have to be managed in that situation, I thought it might be helpful for some of you who have not seen the reality of what that looks like, or need a visual representation of the challenges that might crop up in your own life, not so that you can replicate what I'm doing, but mostly so that you can plan it through, you can see it, to be able to think, if that was me, how would that situation work if I was doing it? And I say this because time and time again, people have passed comment about, how do you stay calm? How do you juggle? I would be a nervous wreck in this situation. You just seem to do it with ease. And it's not because I want these situations, or because I particularly like them. Definitely don't like them. It's because in some way, shape or form, either before, during or after having any one of my children, I have anticipated things that could go wrong. And instead of overall getting upset about it or trying to control it in a way that works for me, accepting that it's happening, looking at that prioritization structure and going with it, is usually the fastest, calmest way out of it. The big help for me in keeping my cool most of the time is acknowledging that it is happening, and what is happening has happened. I've accepted that it's happened, and I'm not fighting with it, I'm going with it. So these are the fires that are being lit, that are already in progress. I'm not standing there shouting at the fires going, well, why are you burning? I'm just kind of working through which one is the most important one, which one's about to catch fire and set something else away, and trying to put them out and stop them spreading as much as possible. So having that mindfulness, and certainly the awareness, certainly the acceptance, and not taking it as a personal attack. These children are not deliberately trying to hurt my feelings. They're just being children. They're managing their own stuff. Having these things, it's not easy to have in the moment. And most of the time, I'm not thinking, I accept this situation. I'm not thinking, I need to prioritize this situation. It's just reflexive now. And I think the last thing that would be helpful to remember is that these situations, you might be the type of person that keeps their cool all the time. You can't. It's not realistic. There will always be an occasion where you can't keep your cool, where you do shout, you do slip up, and that's not because you're a bad parent. It's not because you've done anything wrong. It's because the situation just had too many plates to spin, and all of the hormonal side of it, all of the stress side of it, just got the better of you in that moment. But it's not something to beat yourself up on. It's a learning opportunity. How can I do this better again next time? Why did this work so poorly for me today? What is it that was going wrong in my own day that made me a bit more hypersensitive than I would normally be, or less capable of being able to think quickly enough to prioritize? Whatever it is that's gone wrong, working it back through. Nothing that happens is unfixable. Well, there's very little that can happen that's unfixable. It's always safety first for them and for you. Acknowledging the emotions, acknowledging the stress, not pretending that it didn't happen, and not beating yourself up for not doing something perfectly, are really, really helpful tools to keep on your belt and to have at hand. If you're going to have multiple babies in a short space of time, definitely not beating yourself up and just trying to do it better next time are the best things for you, really. If you're already midway through this process, like me, then you're in good company. I hope this has been helpful, and you're doing a great job. I'm really interested to hear how other people have experienced toddler behaviour, multiple toddler behaviour, prioritising in the moment. What have you done differently? Have you read something that's been particularly helpful? I've mentioned How to Talk So That Little People Will Listen. I think that would be my perfect goal for every situation, ideally, always. It's not to say that that happens. Probably 50% of the time I manage to see that through. But yeah, tell me what you think. And if you want to have some more of this kind of stuff, the science-based insight to parenting of many tiny people, then do consider subscribing. So thank you for joining me. I'll see you again next time.